We've travelled a long way and a lot of miles.
Auntie Sue Hazeldine is on a cross-country mission.
Nothing about nuclear is safe, just nothing.
But this journey began decades ago.
I was about 2 years old when the atomic test started in Maralinga. I was on a mission called Kuniba, and I don't remember the atomic tests much, of course. The kids all thought it was a dust storm coming in, and the oldies are yelling at them to get in the house because they knew it was poison. I still didn't know anything until I got my thyroids out and they were cancerous. I decided to fight anything nuclear from then on.
Her latest fight has taken her from her home in Ceduna to Port Kembla, where Australia's future fleet of nuclear-powered submarines could one day be based.
We've been poisoned once. We don't need any more poisoning from anything else.
British nuclear tests in the 1950s and 60s scarred a landscape and a people and helped sow the seeds of a deep anti-nuclear movement in Australia.
Last year, they persuaded more than 250,000 Australians to march in the streets.
This era would influence a future generation of trade union and labour leaders and even federal policies.
I have advised the Philippines government for about a year now, including drafting a national nuclear law for them.
Helen Cook is a nuclear law expert who's spent over a decade advising countries developing civil nuclear programs. She can't advise her own government though, because in Australia, nuclear power is banned.
I got asked the question frequently, what is your country doing with nuclear energy and why do you have these bans? And I found it a very difficult question to answer, other than simply to use my own experience, which was to say that when I left Australia, I didn't know anything about nuclear energy, literally nothing. Now, coming home to Australia, I haven't received the negative reaction that I thought.
Despite having the world's largest uranium deposits, in 1998, Australia shut the door on nuclear power. Then Prime Minister John Howard needed the Greens' support in the Senate to upgrade Australia's only nuclear research reactor at Lucas Heights. In exchange, he agreed to a prohibition on nuclear power plants.
I think the ayes have it.
He later attempted to revive the discussion about nuclear.
I want a full-blooded debate in Australia about this issue.
But was shut down by his opponents.
Let's hear from the Prime Minister where the nuclear reactors will be sited, in what electorates, in what areas outside capital cities, and where the nuclear waste will be stored.
15 years on, and those same questions are again being asked as the coalition prepares to put nuclear at the centre of its energy policy. Australia's now on a path to net zero emissions by 2050. Coal-fired power stations are closing, power prices have been rising, and there's a growing backlash in parts of regional Australia to the massive expansion of renewables. But politically, the battle lines have been drawn.
We've started this discussion about the latest technology, nuclear, because it's zero emissions, it can provide us with cleaner power, but affordable power and reliable power.
Order. Nuclear power is a lot like the Liberal Party, Mr Speaker. No help to anyone today. Completely wrong for Australia's future and notorious for waste that takes forever to clean up.
Estimates vary, but building nuclear power plants comes with huge capital costs, far higher than wind and solar farms. Few have been built since the 1990s, and the ones that have typically been beset by cost blowouts and delays.
The economics right now are terrible, and we've got much better options as things stand.
Tony Wood from the Grattan Institute says he wouldn't rule out nuclear, though, as a plan B in the future.
We have to understand how things are going with our plan A. That is, we're building a lot of renewables. There are some challenges, as we're finding, but this is a commitment we've made. The second side of things will be there are some significant unknowns about nuclear. The promise of small modular reactors is quite attractive to Australia, because if you could make these things in factories and dramatically drive down the cost, then that could be interesting in the future. And so we should watch that.
The coalition's considering both large-scale and small modular reactors. SMRs are basically mini nuclear power plants that are assembled in a factory and can be set up quickly. They're considered the next generation. Several designs are in development, but are yet to be proven commercially.
Small modular reactors is a strategy that the West especially has adopted to the question of how do we actually get back into nuclear and build things faster, make them safer, make them smaller, okay? So their kind of targeted timeframes are about 3 to 5 years of construction compared to, say, 5 to 8 years for a large nuclear.
According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, a country can go from considering nuclear to having nuclear in its power grid within 10 to 15 years. And Helen Cook says Australia wouldn't be starting from scratch.
We've been a nuclear country since the 1950s when we started our first research reactor. We operate one of the world's best research reactors today down at Lucas Heights, operated by ANSTO. We have an existing nuclear regulator in the form of the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, ARPANSA. It exists today. So we have a lot here to build upon.
Time and cost are key issues. But the fear factor is perhaps the biggest barrier to overcome for Australians who have witnessed nuclear disasters at 3 Mile Island, Fukushima and Chernobyl.
The United States, Japan and the Ukraine have experienced the worst nuclear accidents that we've had. All those 3 countries are signatories to the pledge that was made at COP28 to triple our global nuclear energy capacity to 2050. That, to me, is significant. These countries are not doubling down, they're tripling or trebling down on their nuclear generation commitments.
There are signs attitudes might be shifting. Essential polling suggests about half of Australians back the development of nuclear power. A recent news poll found 55% of respondents would support the use of small modular reactors on the site of retiring coal-fired power stations. Support was highest among younger Australians.
As you go further away from the fuel into the coolant, how does the temperature vary?
At the University of New South Wales, Edward Obard is training the next generation of nuclear engineers who are even more in demand thanks to the AUKUS submarine pact.
I was amazed by the kind of deafening silence when AUKUS was announced. There really wasn't very much opposition to it.
He believes it might open the door to nuclear power.
Young people are very open to it. They don't have the same kind of social upbringing that the boomer and the Gen X's did of living through the Cold War and nuclear disarmament and that whole tumultuous period. Nowadays, people think the greatest threat to their future is climate change, and they're willing to consider, all good solutions to that. For me, I think really the case to use nuclear for energy is actually a moral case, and that for me was the reason I got into this field, is because I saw it as a environmentally low impact way to decarbonise.
For Auntie Sue Hazeldine, it would leave a very different legacy.
We must think about the next generation. What are we going to leave them? Are we going to leave them nice, clean, fresh air? Or are we going to leave them nuclear mines and nuclear waste dumps? Because we got to remember that the future is not ours, it forever belongs to the next generation.